Change.org seit einem Jahr hier in Deutschland, ein bisschen mehr als ein Jahr. Letztes Jahr im Juli habe ich angefangen, wenige tausend Nutzer, jetzt sind wir bei 1,5 Millionen. Und genau fast vor einem Jahr war der Gründer von Change, Ben Rattray, schon mal hier. Und da, ja, die Unsicherheit war noch groß und wird das hier funktionieren. Wir waren alle noch gespannt, wie es sich entwickeln würde. In diesem Jahr, wenn ich zurückschaue, ist unglaublich viel passiert. Ich erinnere mich noch gut an die Situation, als auf einmal David Hasselhoff vor der Tür stand und gesagt hat, ich unterstütze euch beim Protest der Eastside Gallery. Blöderweise haben wir dann beschlossen, dass ich der Bodyguard von David Hasselhoff werde. Als dann zehntausende Menschen an der Eastside Gallery standen, war David dann auf einmal mein Bodyguard und ich habe mich dann schnell aus der Affäre gezogen. Ich werde auch nicht vergessen, wie Malte, 18, sich mit der Telekom angelegt hat, um die Flatrate-Drosselung zu bekämpfen. Und wir haben eine große Unterschriftenübergabe organisiert für Malte. Und Malte wollte ganz digital sein und die Unterschriften auf einem Memory Stick an den Vorstand der Deutschen Telekom übergeben. Nächsten Tag rief der Vorstand an das Büro und sagte, ja, der Stick ist leider leer. Solche Situationen sind so viele lustige Sachen passiert im letzten Jahr. Ich möchte ganz kurz eine Anekdote erzählen, weil sie passiert ist, als Ben Rattray letztes Jahr zum ersten Mal in Deutschland war. Wir sind zur DPA gefahren für unser erstes Interview und saßen im Taxi und mein Telefon klingelte. Dran war Doris Sirbe. Kennt jemand hier Doris Sirbe? Den Namen schon mal gehört? Das ist eine 76 Jahre alte Frau, die mit zu den Hausbesetzerinnen der Stillestraße gezählt hat. Also die Omas und Opas, die ihr Haus besetzt haben. Habt ihr das mitbekommen? Pankow, Stillestraße? Doris Sirbe am Apparat. Paula, ich habe eine wichtige Frage, ich will die Unterschriften ausdrucken, ich finde den Knopf nicht, kannst du mir helfen? Ich so, Doris, klar, kein Problem, aber ich bin hier gerade mit dem Gründer von Change im Auto, wir machen ein Interview, ich bin aufgeregt, habe wenig Zeit, erklärt ihr also, wo dieser Button ist zum Ausdrucken. Sie so, Dankeschön, sag doch mal dem Gründer, dass ich den Button nicht finden kann, also das können Sie wirklich besser machen. Und ich dachte mir, wenn es das ist, we can fix that. Ich freue mich sehr, dass ihr alle hier seid. Ich übergebe das Mikro jetzt an Tilo und Ben Rattray, die euch durch den Abend führen. Dankeschön.
Thank you so much. She could have just said anything, and I have no idea. My German is really bad, so I apologize. My English is somewhat better. But it's awesome to be here. I just came actually from London this morning, really early. We gathered people about 48 hours ago to do something similar, kind of social change makers, journalists, people in the media, entrepreneurs. And the reason is that we think a core thesis for starting the organization is we live at a really unique and special time, at the intersection of two really important trends. The first is the global trend of the disenchantment, the sort of sense that people don't have a voice in their own government, maybe during voting but not in between elections, and aren't able to have the kind of impact they want in the world. That's one, I think, really important global trend. The second is technology's capacity to enable people to come together and raise their voice and be more effective than ever before, right? A countervailing trend. And the first time that we saw that and most in full force was about 3 years ago. And I was still working out of the house. We have almost 200 employees now around the world in 18 countries. And this is 3 years ago. I was by myself. We had a few people on staff in San Francisco. And I see this petition on the site from, of all places, South Africa. And we had really not a lot of petitions outside the US at that point. And it tells this incredible story of this woman whose good friend had just been grabbed in the street in South Africa in Cape Town. She was raped and almost killed. And the reason is that she's a lesbian woman and the man was trying to turn her straight. It's this awful practice called corrective rape in South Africa. Happens more than a dozen times a week at that point. And in most situations, this has been historic. People have felt disempowered. They've become a recluse. They've been by themselves. They've gone out in the countryside. But this woman decided to stand up. And she starts a petition, despite having really no network, no connection. We see this, and over the next 7 days, she gets 170,000 people to join from 150 countries. It becomes a massive story across South Africa, embarrasses the government. She then takes the tool, she emails people, mobilizes people offline in front of Parliament. And after weeks of campaigning, and literally decades in which the government didn't even acknowledge this issue as something that existed in the country, Parliament passed a national task force to investigate and to stop the incidents of corrective rape in that country. An incredible illustration of the power of seemingly the least powerful person in that country, the This is a woman who nobody would have identified as a potential movement builder, who built the most effective online movement in the history of her country with a petition and a story. And since then, we thought, was this going to be an anecdote, a single one-off, or is this going to be systemic, continued? And we've seen an enormous explosion of this over the past 3 years, more than 500,000 petitions around the world. We now have offices in 18 countries. There are victories, more than a dozen every single day. There's actually an amazing campaign right now going on that Paul and I were talking about in Thailand, where there's actually a law that elected one of the parties tried to push in to allow a lot of elected officials who attempted a coup in 2009 to get amnesty. And in response, when the petition started, almost 600,000 people to join, the biggest petition we think in the history of Thailand. Massive offline protests now in court, sparked because of this online movement, and it looks like there's no way this is going to pass anymore because the people power that in large part was enabled through new technology. Of course, we've seen this here as well. We started here about a year ago with Paula anchoring the office and has built really an awesome team, and started with just more than 10,000 users, and now have it was 1.5 million people in Germany. I remember when I was here last year about this time, there's a really heartwarming story, one of the first campaigns that won. It was a number of old men and women who were squatting in a home, a retirement home, and they were being kicked out by the local government here in Berlin, and they decided to protest. So they decided to squat, not leave this home. And they needed some outside sort of awareness. They needed to spread their story, and so they actually started a petition. These very elderly people, and they got more than 10,000 people to join. It became a very large story. Some of you may remember it, and really kind of, to some extent, shamed the government, forced a response, and then they allowed a solution where these old people now stay in the same home they were protesting having to leave. Right? And what's interesting is this is a very, very small thing, but the power we've seen with technology is not one small thing, but then 10 and hundreds and thousands of small victories all across the country. There was another campaign recently here in Germany where there was a 16-year-old kid, a Syrian kid, who actually been in Germany for the past 10 years. So for all intents and purposes, he was German, acted like a German, spoke like a German, felt like a German, and the government kicked him out of the country. His dad separated him from his sister and his mother. It's a long saga, but the amazing story is that his sister starts a petition after being ignored by the government, and she gets tens of thousands of people to join. It becomes a big narrative. She actually ends up getting invited to speak with the governor of Lower Saxony just before the election. This is a young woman, 20 years old, she was not heard before, and then directly after the election, the new interior minister, she granted asylum for her brother. Right? And the last example I'll give here that's been really powerful, I think, as an illustration of more national sort of politics, that's something I'm sure we'll talk more about. There were, in the sort of early kind of days of the Snowden case or the NSA scandal, this is before Ruppelgate, which got even worse. There were about 30 German writers, prominent writers, who started a petition asking Merkel to not wait and see, to take proactive steps to address the NSA scandal, and got tons of people to join them. It was tens and tens of thousands of people. They did this awesome offline protest right in front of her office, got a huge amount of awareness. It's an example of a campaign that didn't necessarily win outright, but changed public narrative and advanced a new idea of what might be possible. And so we see this, not as just a few incremental campaigns, but as the beginning of an exciting movement that will unfold over the coming years. And what we see, the dynamic we see in every country, is that a single victory inspires other people to start a campaign who win themselves, who inspire more people, and it builds this movement. And the most exciting thing is, we're fighting is not how do you build tools to enable people to advance change. It's actually how do you change culture so people believe it is possible. Because a necessary condition of mobilizing people is the hope that they can make a difference. And that in large part in the early stage of the growth of people-powered movements around the world is one of the most important components. And the second piece is with that hope, the increased expectation that people have that their own government is going to respond. In the beginning, it's sort of incremental and one-off, but as it grows more and more, you get the expectation of government actually has to respond directly and transparently with accountability to their own constituents and citizens. We're actually now about to launch, as we just did in the US with prominent Republicans and Democrats, the ability for almost verified accounts for elected officials, sort of like Twitter, but directly responding to their own constituents. And we're really excited about that the future is a systemic shift, not a couple campaigns, but actually a new way of politics where individuals directly communicate with elected representatives, not every election, but every day. And then the corporate side is really interesting because, we think that companies can be an enormous positive force for social good, and that they should happen historically nearly as much as is possible. And when we started the organization in 2007, by we, I mean me, by myself, with a good friend of mine from Stanford, my co-founder on the technical side, there's sort of this divide, I think, is quite false between nonprofits and for-profits. The idea that either you were doing good or you were making money off the backs of other people. What we think is an incredible merger of the two, and I know a lot of you feel the same way, this ability to actually leverage the power and scale of business for positive social change. And so we actually started the organization as a nonprofit, and I was challenged by this by lots of people that I knew in Silicon Valley, and they said, look, why don't you actually take the kind of technology and the scale and the resources of Silicon Valley and actually apply it for positive change in the world? And so we did something that was sort of controversial at the time. We said we want to be a social business. We're actually use the model of business and show that it's possible to build this kind of company. And I think exactly what we've done, we can talk more about it maybe during the conversation, but if we'd been a nonprofit, because of the way we emerged and all the things we had to do in the early stage to pivot, to be able to dynamically respond, which was 4 years to find out how to be most effective for building the best tools to enable people to make change, we couldn't have done that as a nonprofit. The sort of flexibility we had, the resources we had, and the scale that we had really was most effective. The maximum impact we could make is actually through a company structure, although a social benefit structure that we're trying to sort of help advance in the US. And what's exciting, I think, about sort of the way our campaigns impact companies is it's an immense explosion of campaigns, not just around politics, but around companies. We're seeing increasingly, organizations, corporations have massive influence, of course, on our lives, on workers' rights, on the environment, on supply chain in other countries as well. And we're seeing this huge explosion of campaigns. And in many ways, companies are more responsive than politicians, at least in the early stages. And I tell people the reason is, it's easier to switch your detergent than your member of parliament, right? It's a lot easier to change the products that you buy than it is the politicians you elect. And so there's much more responsiveness early on. And we've seen this kind of massive explosion, which I think is one of the most exciting things today. There's a campaign, actually Caroline, I think, is here, who started this campaign because Johnson & Johnson has this baby cream, and it had preservatives in it that actually are not used in the US, that are banned in some places in Europe. And it was called The Task. This petition started, tens of thousands of people joined, became a big story, really embarrassed Johnson & Johnson and forced them to do the right thing, because they now live in a world in which there's full transparency about the way they do their work, about the product, about the supply chain, and there's full accountability where they have to explain to the public, right, justify to the public why they're doing what they're doing. And the reason this is so exciting for me is it's building a structure of incentives to give companies the economic incentive, right, to do the right thing. Actually, having them have a new structure of business. It's not that these are good people, and many places bad incentives, where they can make more money by doing not well by their own consumers or by the public. And I think that a massive number of campaigns, as it explodes, can actually provide a new structure where actually the companies that do right in the world are the ones that also make good money and good business sense. And the ultimate impact of all this, I think, and the sort of government side and the corporate side is what we all want, which is a government that reflects what the public wants and not what private special interests want, and companies that respect the public good and its own consumers and not the private for-profit interests of just shareholders. And that is literally this new technology and what we're building online. I think the world we can build together. It is not guaranteed, it is not inevitable, but some of the people that are most important for building the foundations of that new world are the people in this room and what you're doing. Which is why I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ben Redray. Welcome, everybody. What? Okay, Caroline is not here. Okay, before we start the conversation, let's first get rid of the table. We need to sit a little closer.
This is going to be very intimate.
I mean, you do know Yamani, right? We said as closely as possible. Thanks for the talk. I didn't do any of my homework, so glad you're giving it.
Tick most of the boxes out.
The first question that came into my mind was if petitions really work, would they be illegal?
I think some politicians wish they were illegal. I think what's exciting for us right now is that this is, you have a government here in Germany, as you know, with a massive majority, huge amount of, I think the opposition doesn't have the kind of power to have real voice in a way that I think, ironically, you can outside government have real voice. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about petitions and online campaigning and whatnot, is working outside traditional channels of power, even after elections, to be able to influence the political process.
Right. Tell us how this whole thing started. How old has changed at all?
It's regrettably older than I'd like to admit. So it's 6 years old. Launched said 6 years ago.
So it's going to go to school soon.
Yeah, it's in adolescence right now. No, in sincerity, I think we think we're in the very early stages of what's possible. We're just scratching the surface. I think we have a huge future.
But I heard you had to try a couple times before this whole thing really started off. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we had lots of epic failures in the beginning. So for the first 3-4 years, as is the case for lots of internet companies, we had no idea what we were doing. We just built lots of tools that were ineffective. We had the common vision of how do we empower people to create change. We just frankly had no idea how to do it. We built tons of ways in which people could come together to make a difference and failed, and had almost no traffic. And it was only when we went back to the oldest tool in advocacy, right? Petitions. We thought petitions didn't matter. They were trivial, but what was remarkable was a combination of petitions and social media was the secret sauce that ended up allowing everything to take off.
So, did the whole Obama campaign or the whole presidential campaign in 2008 do anything to boost the development?
I think what the Obama campaign did is, more than anything else, grow a new class of people, a new group of young people that were deeply committed and passionate about the idea of using technology for change. Regardless of political affiliation, it was a real demonstration of the incredible ability of young people with the skills that, frankly, in an older generation didn't have, to have outsized impact. And that actually led lots of people, at least in the United States, into political organizing.
All right. So, just to clarify, can you tell us what actually is a petition? I wonder, because maybe an American understands something completely differently than a European or an African guy.
I hope not. But for us, historically, petitions have been these big, gargantuan, implausible aspirations. In many cases, it's petition the UN to end climate change, or the Prime Minister to end hunger. And these kinds of, literally sometimes, and these sort of very lofty aspirations have given petitions a bad name. What we see is it's an incredible.
They were too naive.
I think they're a bit naive. I think it's a lack of recognition of how power works. And in many cases, the most effective means of winning change is the smallest thing first. How do you win incremental steps to longer national change? And so that's, I think, what we see is petitions that are targeting specific local officials that are asking for particular policy change. One of my favorite campaigns in the United States this last year was there's a 13-year-old girl who, for an 8th grade project, was going to reduce plastic in her town and reduce the use of plastic bags. So tries to get a tax passed, starting a petition, simple, to her city council. And she, then the plastics industry actually passes a law at the state level to make it illegal for cities to pass tax on plastic bags. There's this ridiculous law now that she can't even get her law passed. She ends up petitioning her governor, the sort of head of the state, to veto this bill. It's a 13-year-old girl, she cannot even vote. She gets 100,000 people to join and embarrass the governor. He calls this 13-year-old girl on her home phone line on a Saturday, says, "I've seen your campaign, I've been inspired, I'm going to veto the bill, and you're the first to know." And this massive explosion of teenagers around the country, and they'll start these little petitions around plastic bags campaigns. Now, if you care about the environment, your first inclination may be, let's start a massive campaign to end climate change. But actually, the most effective mechanism to start that movement might be a small local tax on plastic bags or something else like that. So we see those kind of small petitions being many ways the most effective.
So it's like first go local, then try to make it into a global thing?
Yeah, that happens on a regular basis. We see campaigns jump from one country to the next. There's a great campaign in Canada earlier this year, and it was asking the Canadian government to nominate Malala for a Nobel Prize. This is before Malala was a really household name. And it's a huge amount of traction in Canada, and the Prime Minister Harper, tweets the campaign, says, I endorse this campaign, me and my wife endorse this campaign. So nominates her for the Nobel Prize. And then in 12 other countries, including Germany, people start petitions in concert, sort of asking their own elected representatives to nominate Malala for the Nobel Prize. It became a huge movement. And so you sometimes see campaigns in certain countries spread around the globe.
So did Malala get it?
So she is scheduled to get this next year. There's actually, what's funny, we were talking about this during this campaign, and I said, this is going to be tough precedent because of the Nobel sort of committee ends up giving Malala the Nobel Prize, and like in part there's this massive global petition for it, where we're just seeing the very beginning of petitions for Nobel Prizes. But unfortunately she did not win, although a huge amount of awareness raised about her story, about the plight of girls in Pakistan especially, the lack of education, and it's just the beginning, I think, of a movement for better education, in part because of that campaign and because of the awareness of the near miss on the Nobel Prize.
Maybe she will get it some other day.
It's possible. She has many more years. She's 16.
So you mentioned that Change.org is not a non-profit, but also not like a corporation. It's a social business.
Yep.
How does it work?
Yeah,
Because, I mean, in Germany, usually when people try to do good, people expect you to do it in a non-profit way.
Yeah. It's, I think, historically similar in the United States. It's a new form of how to do business. And the idea is that your mission is first, your impact is first. You generate revenue in service of advancing your mission. So all the revenue we generate goes into building free tools and support around the world, in particular in places where we wouldn't be generating revenue. Places like Thailand, some places like Indonesia, and the Philippines, and all those other countries. And I think that it's what you're doing is you're recognizing that the mission of the organization can be divorced from the structure, from a tax status. And the question is not whether you should be a nonprofit or a company, it's what is the vehicle through which you can maximize your change in the world. And this, we thought social business is that for us. Given the scale, we want to hit the hundreds of millions of users we think we'll be able to have.
So if I donated like $100 to you, it would not be tax exempt.
Yeah, and we don't usually accept donations. We definitely don't have tax-exempt donations, but all the revenue is generated from advertisements on the site. So we don't take, a lot of those advertisers, nonprofits, they raise money, but we don't.
So I wonder, are petitions only like possible on a governance level so far? Could you turn that into like a corporate thing, like where employees of corporations start a petition within the company to change something that's fucked up?
Yes, regrettably this is true because I get petitioned all the time by my own staff. And so the first petition, one of the first petitions that won was, we were in our first San Francisco office. We have this big jug of water in the office. And I'm drinking all day long, and one of our designers says, look, this is unsustainable. We should have a filter plugged into the wall for clean water. This is much better than having a car drive around every single week to dump off this water. And I'm like, look, I realize that's probably technically true, but we're really doing a lot of good in the world right now. This is busy, let's just let this one slide. He literally takes a photo of me pouring myself water, and then puts this on a petition, draws an X around it, and petitions me, gets the entire staff to sign it, post a petition on my mom's Facebook wall, literally, and then I'm like, oh my god, so I give it, of course. And so it's a bad precedent now because the team petitions me anytime they want something changed.
But let's try to think of a huge corporation, Siemens here, or Microsoft. What kind of corporational petitions do?
I think that one of the most underappreciated and so far realized pieces of power and influence right now is actually employees over their own company, to your point. So I'll give a couple quick examples. One, there was a huge petition in the early days, about 2 years ago, in the US around Bank of America. So Bank of America, they pass a law to make it difficult to switch your bank, and then they add a $5 fee to use your own bank card after it's tough to switch your bank. It's a brilliant move to generate billions of dollars. And there's a 22-year-old part-time nanny who starts a petition out of outrage. It's 300,000 people to join, huge mobilization. She goes offline, she brings her credit card in front of the bank, she cuts up her credit card, she's all over the media and embarrasses the biggest bank in America. And in response to this 22-year-old part-time nanny and the movement she has mobilized, they literally apologize in public, rescind the $5 fee, as does every other major national bank that was trying to copy them after. Epic. And to the point of the employee power, many of the points of pressure where employees were signing the petition and writing about how this is ridiculous, and as a customer, because they're customers and employees, they thought this was unfair and unjust. And so if you're running a company and you start to have an outside movement that becomes an inside movement and you're having management difficulties, it's a real threat. So I think that if you look at companies, frankly, knowing a lot of people that work at Google, this happens at Google sometimes, not petitions directly, but when the company's making decisions, they realize Google has recognized the power they have around their own business decisions, and I think there's, to the extent there's a greater recognition amongst employees of their own power to call their own company to be its best self, to be as ethical as possible. I think we're going to have real increased sort of efficacy of social businesses within major businesses.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe someone should start like a petition so the banks stop doing bad business.
What's funny on this is
they were responsible for the financial crisis. Maybe someone should start a petition, stop doing that, and the insiders go like, yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Well, what's interesting is, so we got a lot of press around this Bank of America campaign, and the question that I got was, well, does this mean that every single time a bank has a ridiculous fee for its consumers, there's going to be a petition? And my response is, I don't think banks are going to have as many ridiculous fees for consumers, because they're going to face this ridiculous backlash of people with compelling narratives that shame them in public and make it difficult to justify their own business practices. And that's what's pretty exciting, is shifting incentives. If you're sitting around a boardroom, now a bunch of old people sitting around a boardroom in general, making decisions about your business and about the way you treat your customers, about your supply chain, you have to recognize two things now. One is that everyone is going to find out the decisions you make and the consequences of those decisions. Full transparency. And second is you're going to have to justify those to your daughter, because there's full accountability. And everyone is going to know what you've done and call you to task. And that is a powerful force. We've seen this happen. I'll give the daughter comment comes in part because there's a huge campaign around, one of the most dangerous jobs in the world is picking flowers, which is crazy. This is seemingly innocuous, but the reason is women who pick flowers and are pregnant have double-digit percentage of chance of having a deformed baby. It's a huge deformation of babies because of the chemical exposure to the women that are picking flowers. And the solution to this is fair trade. And this doesn't happen because companies are intentionally evil. It's happened because it's sort of this benign neglect, because it costs more money, no one really demands it in the marketplace, no one else is doing it. And so there's a petition started asking one of the biggest retailers in the world for flowers, 1-800-Flowers, to accept fair trade flowers. And of course they saved them, the first day. And the next day, 55,000 people take action. And the day after that, they turn around 180 degrees and become the first flower retailer in the world to accept fair trade flowers. And the reason, we asked their head of communications, and the reason was their CEO woke up that morning. Here's what this campaign did. Here's all these negative comments on Facebook. Goes to their Facebook page, sees all these angry comments and all this about him actually being responsible for deformed babies across Latin America, which is not entirely untrue. And thinks through his 55,000 people that took action, turns to his head of communication and says, "My daughter is on Facebook." And he was embarrassed. And he couldn't it used to be the case that because of the obscurity, the lack of transparency and action in business, you could think of yourself as a good person and do things that have negative consequences. It's just not possible anymore. At least soon, it's a world we're entering in, where you're going to have to justify that to your pastor or your friends or the board members you're with or your family. And the forcing function of that, I think, is a really powerful and positive force and calls companies to be their best selves.
So, talking about corporations, not long ago I learned from Jeremy Scale that corporations are people in America.
Yes.
So, can corporations start petitions? Could they use the whole change.org thing and game the system and be like, yeah, we want that.
The fact that
see business in that.
The fact that corporations are people too was also a surprise to Americans. What's interesting now is so companies, anyone can start a petition. Right? Companies can as well. But what we see is funny is the likelihood that companies get lots of signatures is so much less than individuals. You have this ironic dynamic where it's a platform on which companies are almost systemically disadvantaged. And it's actually embarrassing in some cases. Large corporations, multinationals, huge resources, and 13-year-old girls are crushing them. And so, if anything, I think it's to some extent there's a concern about how they can most effectively engage. Now, I think that the primary way that companies will engage is by directly responding to people that are petitioning. So in the same way we have individuals, there'll be profiles, verified accounts for elected officials, there'll be that for companies. And I think it's a healthy thing. We want companies to be directly engaging with and responding to their own consumers. And that's going to be something we roll out. And I think that's the primary way in which companies will get involved.
So, how many petitions have there been so far on change.org?
It's more than 500,000.
500,000.
And I've signed every single one.
Really?
I'm not allowed to sign petitions anymore. It's really funny. I actually get this critique. Somebody was on my profile recently, and they're like, "Oh, you don't sign petitions anymore." And I'm like, I can't take position on petitions all that much. And I have to be like almost like a newspaper editor. But objective. It's really important for us not to be, a political entity with our own perspective and opinion, because then that colors and prejudices the petitions and the voices of the everyday people that start the campaigns on our site. So we're actually very proactive with this openness. So there may be petitions that lots of individuals on our staff, lots of friends, others may vehemently disagree with. But part of the only way in which we can actually represent and support our users and allow them to speak with their own voice is by not looking like a partisan or a political entity.
So, I wonder, what's the percentage of serious petitions? Are there a lot of jokes, joke petitions on?
It's funny, you get this thing where the overwhelming majority of petitions, certainly those that take off, are pretty serious in the sense that they're addressing a real social issue. You have a very small number that don't, and sometimes they become very big, and so press likes to talk about the ones that are funny. And so you get this sort of, I think, a little bit of an unrepresentative picture of this. And so anyway, so the overwhelming majority of petitions that take off are things that are addressing local, regional or national issues.
Has there ever been a petition where you first laughed at and you were like, what the F is this? And then realized, hey, this is a great cause.
It's a really important one. So there's a petition asking Bert and Ernie to come out as gay. Literally. This has been the theory for a long time, the Sesame Street, right, with American public television, that there's, the Muppets, literally, there is, this relationship between Bert and Ernie that's never been acknowledged, and so there's actually, it's so funny. So I was like, this is ridiculous. And the Washington Post covers it. And then CNN covers it. And all these, and then actually, though it was never going to happen, ended up generating an authentic conversation about sort of homophobia in the media, the representation of even sort of puppets that might be gay as well. And so though it seems silly, and I wouldn't have normally pitched it to the Washington Post, it ended up getting a substantial amount of traction. It was pretty interesting.
So, did anything happen? Did they come out?
I think that the response from the station was actually, we don't take a position on sort of gender or on any sexual orientation, which is the most diplomatic response possible. I think they had no idea what to do.
So I told people I'm going to talk to you today, and some people were like, change.org. I'm skeptical of the whole concept because maybe it leads to less activism. It makes people more passive. Would you agree?
It's a great question. It's a question that comes up a lot. This idea, this sort of angry idea of slacktivism is the case that people are just clicking online and it's not relevant and people are actually more disengaged. I was talking to one of the executive directors of Greenpeace recently about this, and he just laughs and says that there's this concept of ladder of engagement, is where you don't actually start by asking somebody to go and do a 10-day political protest if they've never taken political action before in their life. It's rather that you get them where they're at. You say, well, what is the opportunity? How can they get in the easiest possible way? The fact that signing petitions is easy isn't a bug, it's a feature. And it's not an accident, it's intentional. because you want to get the most people possible to express their voice, to come together, and then you have this opportunity, once you're activated, to mobilize them for further action. So a lot of the campaigns that have been most effective, you'll get after you sign a petition an email about a delivery, there'll be some in-person protest, there may be someone who's trying to raise money for sort of advancing the campaign further. You might want to call the decision makers. There are all these additional things you can do once you sign the petition. So it's actually an initial point of activation to increase the number of people that are more deeply over time getting involved in social change. It's not the full extent of the experience, it's just the beginning.
So what I take away from this is that whenever you start a petition, make it as local as possible. Don't go for the global level, right?
So generally speaking, yes. It depends. It's not so much local and global as specific and achievable. When you look at campaigns that, there'll be lots of national campaigns around companies. Companies that actually, there's a telecom petition in Germany recently where they announced that they were going to sort of end their flat rate fee. And there's an 18-year-old recent high school graduate who starts this petition. He had 200,000 signatures, became a big story. Actually invited by the executives to come by the office and talk about it. And they started sort of shifting a little bit of the policy and allowing a little bit more throttling. And then there's recently a judicial case that made this illegal and overturned this policy. But this is a national story and a national campaign. So companies tend to be more national in many cases. In politics, it tends to be more local. But frankly, I think this will shift over time as more people come onto the platform. As we grow in Germany more than 1.5 million and millions more, and as politicians get more and more engaged in the platform.
So, and I still try to be a little naive and try to get rid of the nuclear weapons, climate change, the surveillance state, and all that. How can you should we try to get all those topics a little less abstract? Try to make them more local, with the nuclear weapons issue, try to get Germans to sign up. So the Germans petition, get American nuclear weapons out of Germany, and start with that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I'm trying to think right now what illustrations of this on the surveillance side of things. I think it's a really interesting campaign. There's theoretically you could do something like, all right, well, it's difficult to end this all one fell swoop, but who are the people that influence the people that make the decisions? So if you can imagine, if you get every major multinational company and CEO to, on record, come out against surveillance, right? You actually have a really strong case increasingly over time. And they're just not forced to make public comment on this yet. And so if you had former employees of every major company petition their former employer to come out against the sort of surveillance state, I think you'd get a huge flood of CEOs of companies that have to step off the fence and sort of make a comment about this and take a stand one way or the other. This is not something I'm suggesting, but it's the kind of thing that I think is an illustration of kind of thinking of what we call this power mapping. So instead of saying, well, let's go right to the heart of the matter, let's go sort of on the periphery. I'll give one other example as an illustration of this. In the wake of the Arab Spring, there was a woman, Manal Sharif, very famous women's rights activist in Saudi Arabia. And she takes a video of herself driving and puts it on YouTube. And gets arrested because it is illegal for women to drive in Saudi Arabia. And of course, naturally,
they hurt their ovaries.
I didn't say it. But this is
it's Saudi.
No one outside Saudi.
Saudi.
Yes. But even princes are embarrassed by this. Truly, actually, they won't go on the record on it. But what's interesting is, 11 women that she's friends with decided to start a petition asking the king of Saudi Arabia to change a policy. And of course, the king doesn't care. Right? He's a king, so that's just not going to be effective. And so they came to us and they said, "Well, we're brainstorming about other people that might be effective. And what do you think about Hillary Clinton?" It's like, well, yeah. So we said, well, who influences the king? Who can you influence? Who has influence over the king? The most, at that point, one of the most powerful women in the world. There's the other one here in Germany, and so they decided to start a petition asking Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at the time, to be the first high-ranking U.S. official in history to come out against a major Saudi policy. So they started a petition and get ignored. They get 10,000 signatures, and there's the press asked Hillary, Secretary Clinton, that weekend what she thought about the policy. And she says, "Oh no, we're in private discussions with the Saudis trying to sort of pass this off." And and then they get 10,000 more signatures. They write a press release, they translate it in English, they send it to all her press corps. She gets flooded with questions about this the next week. And Hillary Clinton, 180 degrees around the next day, full force, unequivocally says this is a ridiculous policy, it needs to be changed. The first and highest ranking official in US government history, because 11 women in Saudi Arabia who couldn't even drive to each other's homes started a petition. And awesome. And in response, then they started all these other petitions, getting other people of prominence. Also, Catherine Ashton in the EU was actually wrote a formal letter because she was petitioned to call her to take a stance. And she's certainly not going to support the policy. And she really had no choice. And so you end up sort of looking at, well, your goal is really the Saudi king. But the means of getting to the Saudi king is not direct. It's actually other people over whom have power of the Saudi king.
So, getting back to German politics, but nobody can talk to Ms. Merkel, so we should try to make her people of trust come out on certain topics. Is that what I should take away?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the issue. I think this is really about the strategy. I think that people tend to think this is about just technology, but it's actually about technology combined with intelligent understanding of how power works. And there are a number of things that are really important. Oftentimes the story. Right? If I told you, hey, there's a major campaign right now to get the Saudi king to allow women to drive in Saudi Arabia, you might care, but if you're really honest with yourself, you don't care that much. But if I tell you a story of Manal Sharif who gets arrested because she puts a video on YouTube, and her good friends from their own homes who can't even drive to meet up with each other start a petition, and ask Secretary Clinton, one of the most powerful women in the world, to come out against it, that's awesome. And so narrative and storytelling and personal kind of connection, I think that the NGO sector, the advocacy sector, the campaigning sector has a tough time with this sometimes. It's not that people don't know. But if you're in a big organization, you oftentimes talk about numbers and ideas and policy. But actually what sells and what convinces people to mobilize in many cases are emotions and stories and reality and connection. And I think that's what we're seeing on the site is actually the incredible capacity of everyday people to elevate their voice, to tell their story, to grip people in a way that true numbers just don't. And so I would say, if you look at strategy, your personal stories matter, finding out the people that are of influence, who can influence decision makers matters, but it really depends in a customized way on the particular objective you have for that campaign.
Thank you, Ben. Now we're off to some questions. What's up with you guys? Lots more. We have Mike. Could you state your name or your first name?
My name is Elena. And my question is, you talked a little bit about how you started it, or you thought you'd start as a nonprofit and now your business. Could you elaborate more on that? When you made this decision to switch, what were your concerns, your reservations, and perhaps also why advertising?
It's a great question. And this was actually at the time, in 2007, the most difficult decision I had faced. My biggest concern was losing control. Right? It's ensuring that we built into the DNA of the business, if we were going to become a company, the mission, and that the optimization, the focus on impact. So I was convinced that the thing that we needed was massive speed, the ability to have agility, to be nimble like startups are, and to scale, sort of have resources to be able to go and support hundreds of millions of people. My concern was, well, how do I make sure I control things over time? So we've done something pretty interesting, is that we've done two things. One is we've adopted what in America is called B Corporation, which is in your bylaws, instead of having to maximize shareholder value, you actually have to respect all stakeholders in the environment. And the second is investors or funders don't have any control over the company, and so the board of directors is controlled by actually sort of it's common shareholders, so the founders and the employees, the ultimate staff that will be over time, really control the board and the direction. And that's, I think, something that it is a necessary condition, I would say. It's not just easy for any company. I have lots of friends in the Valley, in Silicon Valley, who start companies with great aspirations, and frankly, sometimes a social benefit mentality, who raise too much money from venture capitalists, who lose control of their company, whose mission changes because of it. And it's why we literally turned down lots of money from venture capitalists and picked the right sort of funders to allow us to retain control and focus on our mission.
Could have Facebook been like a social business without all those venture capitalists?
So Facebook, it wouldn't have been able to scale quite as fast. And part of the challenge in this space is that I think this is going to be an enormous sector in the future, hugely disruptive and positive for impact, the social business sector. The challenge is there aren't a lot of funders still, people that say I want to fund this business and realize that the funding is primarily in service of impact. And there aren't a lot of, a lot of entrepreneurs that are using this model. And so it would have been hard for Facebook to raise as much money as it did, as fast as it did. But imagine, Facebook were a social business. I think they're already doing an immense. I think that there are businesses that are doing hugely good things in the world. Like Twitter, the free flow of information enabled by Twitter is massively important. I think there are small, subtle, but important things that companies like that would change if they weren't worried every day about stock price. And it's not because they're bad people; it's such a difficult situation. Right? I think that Zuck, as an aside, Mark Zuckerberg wrote this letter to shareholders when they went public, and he said explicitly, he said, we are in service of building a product that enables people to connect around the world. And I think he really believes it, truly. But he exists within a system where he wakes up every day, and the only questions, or the most questions he gets asked, are about their finances, about their revenue, about the profits, and about the share price. And that just has a really toxic effect, I think, on lots of businesses. So anyway, I think it's a tough thing.
Hi, thanks for the talk. My name's Ben. I work at a company called Better Place in Berlin. As a tangent, we're actually a social business too. It's gemeinnützige Aktiengesellschaft. So Germany is a bit behind, but people are starting to talk about these new legal forms. So I wanted to build on your comments about slacktivism before. So there's a growing understanding that campaigns don't begin and end with a petition now. It's an important part of something bigger, and to tackle people or to raise awareness, and then it's combined with other more offline campaigning methods. So where do you see change.org in that? Do you see going beyond petition, or are you just going to do that one thing and do it really well and let people use that?
That's a great question. So we use the word petition still because that's the easiest way to simply access what it is, but petitions are really campaigns. All a petition is says, I want this to change the world, this is who has the power to change it, and this is why you should join me. And when you join, you're basically joining a community of people who now have the ability to mobilize together to do additional things. And so what we'll build are the depth of tools that you can use to more effectively and powerfully engage people over time. So make it easier to raise money for a campaign. Let's say you buy an advertisement, print a sign. Things like I want to go easily call a decision maker, so I can enter my phone number and click call, and it just literally call my number and connect it to the decision maker. I'd be able to sort of immediately go and an easy facilitation. And so there's all these things that we'll do to make it easier and easier for people to build real movements after people have signed their petition.
Happy. Right.
I wish it were sooner, but it's coming.
Hello, my name is Melanie. You said you have like 1.5 million supporters or something like that in Germany, which is really great, I think, and all in all 500,000 petitions. I wanted to ask you, what's your special secret, especially in Germany, because I think there are more companies like you are and do the same. And so what's your special secret? And the second question is.
Paula is the secret. Not a secret anymore.
So, yeah.
The second question is, you talked about advertising, where you raise money with. What kind of advertising is it? Is it on the page? Because I think I never saw some. And are there any differences in doing advertising in the US and Germany, for example?
That's great questions. What is the secret sauce? I think there are two things. First is building an open platform where anyone, anywhere can start literally anything. This is not an accident. It's not because we're lazy. It is a very intentional choice. If you look at the platforms that have scaled massively for other domains, things like eBay, things like YouTube and Twitter and whatnot, these are open platforms that enable people to have true empowerment, right? And I think that there are other sort of organizations, whenever you have success in a certain domain, when YouTube took off, there's a lot of other video sites as well. And they take kind of different approach in some cases, but usually there's sort of organization that gets lots of traction because it is truly open and it is, to some extent, pioneering. And the second thing is personal stories. I think we recognize that there's an immense power in personal stories, and that we're not organization focused. Organizations certainly use change.org, and I think continue to, but leveraging the incredible power of personal narratives has really allowed people to break through. And a lot of the times, the reason why people start petitions is because they've seen someone else in the media win, and that inspires them to start the same. And that's sort of that viral loop, that positive feedback loop has really been effective for us. And then on the advertising side, the way it is, so we have sponsored petitions in the same way that Twitter has sponsored tweets. So if you're advertising, if you're an organization that's, let's say, Amnesty International or Oxfam, and you have petitions that are, let's say, human rights, when people sign petitions around human rights, there's a bunch of petitions you can see suggested, and some of them are sponsored, and those are advertised in the same way you, again, sponsored tweets, sponsored videos on YouTube, promoted posts on Facebook. So it just personalizes based on your interests.
All right, over here to the left.
Hi, I'm Birgit, and I have a question. You say that you give the people a voice. Now, what happens? You're new here, so we're not used to having a voice. But what happens if everybody has a voice and everybody starts talking? What happens to the political system, which was not built for that? Everybody talking at once. Also, we're probably not going to agree, so it's going to be lots of different voices. And what happens to us, the audience, if we have all these petitions asking for our vote?
Great question. So a couple responses. One is sort of stepping back on the kind of philosophically speaking. If you look at the incredible progress of human rights and equality over the past 200 years, in particular in the West, it is a story of greater and greater numbers of people empowered to raise their own voice in their own governance. That is a fundamental underlying trajectory. Sort of Martin Luther King talked about the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. And this is a part of the expansion of empowerment to greater and greater people. And I think that what we see is when you have more people involved, it actually doesn't just raise everyone's voice. It means there already are raised voices in societies. Many times they're companies or people of means, people with money. And so what's happening actually is it's leveling the playing field. It's not just moving everyone up, and in the same way as I mentioned around companies, companies have usually disproportionate voice and power in politics in those countries, and while they can use these tools as well, it actually advantages much more individuals than institutions. So I think it brings up individuals to that same level. And then on the, are we going to get overwhelmed with too many petitions? I would say two things to that. First of all, what's interesting is we see, instead of just saying all these national petitions, right? You end up seeing these very, very local petitions, and I think people, it doesn't require hundreds of thousands of signatures to win local campaigns. In fact, like dozens can actually do it. And I think we're going to end up seeing a segmentation, a fragmentation, where we don't all see the same petitions. We may see a lot of petitions in total, but each one of us sees a lot of different sort of specific focused petitions. And the final thing is, I think that when companies recognize, as I mentioned before, that they exist in a world in which everyone will know what they do, and they will be held directly accountable. Frankly, they will preemptively inhibit their own behavior, and they won't do as many stupid things that would cause the kind of petitions that would change their behavior. Literally, this is actually shifting incentives. Doesn't mean they still won't happen, but I think that the obvious ones in many cases, we talk a lot about it as a company, we see petitions, and they'll like win right away. The companies will respond, they're like, oh my God, we're gonna respond to this petition, we're gonna change this policy. And now we see them literally, again, just changing the way they do business because they know it's inevitable.
All right, we got 2 questions left.
Okay, hi, Alice. I have not a great question, but a small one. You talked about movements. I'm very interested in movements because there are many movements out there. And my question is, what is the point of this movement? What's the goal? What's the topic? When we come together to be a movement, we need some topic for all of us. Is it just impact? Is it just change? What is it?
So I think that this, as a movement of movements, and so what we do is, it's just not dissimilar from, the fight for democracy, where you have effectively, it's not about a specific issue, it's about a nature of governance, a way in which to organize a people to represent in an equal fashion voice. And so the movement at a broad level is a movement to have democratic decision-making and a really sort of democratizing democracy in many ways. I think that's a shared value of many people. And then within that, what that enables is tons of what we call micro-movements. So small movements are enabled by this broad shift in structure, and that's just a huge diversity of campaigns in those movements. And some are weeks, and some are years. And we think that allowing the open flow of information and anyone to start these and advance them is in the best interest of everybody. So you don't have to join someone else's movement. If you feel passionate about an issue, you can start your own.
Right, I found an additional question.
Hi, my name is Sasha, and based on your examples you told at the beginning, to say it black and white, there are pretty much two worlds colliding, sort of. Yeah, two worlds colliding from young people who have, you see, really problems and to improve society, improve the situation in the country, and so on. And on the other side, again, to say it black and white, you have these old might and power and revenue-focused old grey men. And when these two worlds are totally colliding, what is your experience in the social, emotional mindset change of these corporate people? Is this, damn, it's a revenue threat, we behave social, 2 days later we do the same way? Or is there a slowly change? What is happening there?
I think there is both. We see on a regular basis, one of the most exciting things for me is when we see people who literally welcome this because they recognize. In the case of 1-800-Flowers, in the case of there's a large company called Jamba Juice that actually that disposes of hundreds of millions of styrofoam cups every single year. And there's a petition that called on them to accept compostable cups, and so they wouldn't have this kind of environmental damage. And this petition got started asking Jamba Juice to change, and the staff loved it, and lots of leaders loved it because they finally had the impetus to be able to change. They actually couldn't convince the market, they couldn't convince their board, they thought it was going to be hard to get it through the leadership, but it actually was exciting, it liberated them, and it allowed them to go point to this outside force, and now to have this as almost a lever to do the right thing. And this is something FDR in the United States talked about a lot, which is make me do the thing you want me to do. Right? Make me build the power outside of traditional corridors of power to give me the incentive to do the thing that we all know is in the best interest of the public. And I think that that's the most exciting thing. It is still the case that there's some older corporate heads and politicians who I don't know if that will ever change, but they will be changed out of office and out of jobs sooner if they do not actually respond to the public, because it's bad for their business and it's bad for votes.
Okay, I'll make you answer 2 more questions.
Awesome.
Thanks. Carola, so I'm just wondering, getting back on the individual, I'm over here. So I was just wondering in how far having those petitions and making it so easy to sign those petitions kind of makes us redirect our personal responsibility. So going back to the example of the flowers, it's one thing to say, I don't want dead babies, but it's a whole different story then to have to go and buy fair trade flowers, which are usually a lot more expensive, right? So do we lose our own responsibility by saying, well, I want you, politician or company, to change?
Yeah, what's interesting is, and I totally agree, what's interesting is the sort of social psychology of joining campaigns like this, I think, is really significant, where people, when they raise their voice and say, I think that this should be the case, we should have fair trade flowers, psychologically, all studies indicate you're much more likely to then go do that activity once you ask someone else in a public forum to do the same. So if you actually want to spread awareness about fair trade, make it clear to people the consequences of their purchasing decisions, and make them identify with a better solution, frankly, there's no better way than to leverage a crazy, provocative personal story, spread it like wildfire through social media and the media, and get people to sort of say, yes, I want to add my name to this. It's a lot easier to add your name, but it is the beginning, I think, of psychological transformation and behavior change that people end up undergoing, in part facilitated through the first step of signing a petition that aligns values with future behavior change.
I guess I'm the one with the last question. My name is Caroline, and I was just wondering, so to me, it seems like change sees success when it initiates petition and it initiates change, but it seems to me short-term change. And don't you, as a company, whose main vision and mission is to initiate a change, don't you aim at ensuring that there's sustainable change? And don't you aim at measuring success, making sure that in the long run change is ensured? I mean, aren't you thinking about, for instance, like teaming up with Greenpeace and saying, hey guys, we initiated this in this petition, really proud of that, we know that in 5 years' time it's important that we follow up on A, B, and C. Isn't that something that you seriously consider?
Yeah, so Greenpeace actually, on a regular basis, is on the site posting petitions to leverage the movement of new people who are activated, who they've never had access to before. So most of these, we think institutions actually still matter. We think they are important. We think in particular NGOs, because they have the resources, the expertise, the long-lasting ability to see these things through. I mean, if you're running a campaign around nuclear sort of weapons, that's not going to end in a week or a few weeks or a few months. And institutions absolutely matter. What we think is happening is that individuals are being activated now. They're getting engaged in this issue and they're connecting to these organizations that have done long work. And so this merger of traditional organizations and everyday people making a difference. And I think that's actually the future of organizational campaigning. That's the future of how NGOs will advance their mission. It's actually leveraging this people power, not as opposition, not in competition, but in cooperation.
I got one last question about your name, Change.org. I mean, you got a pretty awesome rap when Obama got elected. He campaigned on change. Like now, five years later, people don't believe a word that comes from the change perspective and all that. Have you gotten a bad rap now?
I think we've gotten a bad rap. I think that the word hasn't gotten a bad rap. I think the person speaking it hasn't had as good a reputation. And understandably so, given the ineffectiveness not just of that administration, but of Washington in general right now. And I think that what we're trying to do is to actually demonstrate to people the actual power they have to make a difference every day. It is only just beginning. We're just 6 years old as a toddler, as you were mentioning. We're about to go to school. And I think that we're just in an early stage, and we'll show more and more and more and more countries that change is actually possible. And it's within their power to make it happen.
Thank you.